Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the Waverly Hills Sanatorium. The Waverly Hills Sanatorium in Louisville, Kentucky is a former tuberculosis hospital that is said to be one of the most haunted places in the United States. The hospital was operational from 1910 to 1961 and housed thousands of patients suffering from tuberculosis during that time. The building's dark history, which includes reports of medical experiments, neglect, and mistreatment of patients, has led to numerous reports of paranormal activity. Visitors to the abandoned hospital have reported hearing strange noises, feeling cold spots, and even seeing ghostly apparitions, including the ghosts of former patients and nurses. The most famous ghostly sighting at Waverly Hills is that of a nurse who is said to have taken her own life in one of the hospital's rooms. Her ghost has been seen by many visitors and is said to be one of the most active spirits in the building. The sanatorium's eerie atmosphere and dark history continue to attract ghost hunters and paranormal enthusiasts from around the world. In our number 9 spot today, we have the Prince Edward Heights Mental Hospital. The Prince Edward Heights Mental Hospital, located in Prince Edward County in Ontario, was a psychiatric hospital that operated from 1913 to 1999. The hospital was known for its very controversial treatments and overcrowding, and there are many stories of patient mistreatment and harm. When the hospital closed, it left behind a dark and eerie legacy. The abandoned hospital has become a popular spot for urban explorers and paranormal investigators, with many reports of strange noises, unexplained occurrences, and ghostly apparitions. Some of the most commonly reported sightings include the ghostly figure of a former patient who is said to roam the halls, as well as the sound of footsteps, screams, which is horrifying, and other unexplained noises. Visitors to the hospital have reported feeling an overwhelming sense of sadness and despair, and many believe that the spirits of former patients still haunt the abandoned building today. In our number 8 spot today, we have Bannack. Bannack, Montana is a ghost town that was once a bustling gold mining community in the late 1800s. Today, however, the town is a popular destination for ghost hunters and urban explorers due to its reputation for being haunted. Visitors to Bannack have reported seeing ghostly apparitions, hearing unexplained noises, and feeling a very strong spiritual energy throughout the town. Some of the most commonly reported sightings include the ghostly figure of a former sheriff who was killed in the line of duty, as well as the ghost of a girl who is said to have died from illness in one of the town's homes. Others have reported feeling a strong sense of unease and fear, particularly in the town's abandoned schoolhouse. Very creepy. While the exact reason for Bannack's haunting remains a mystery, many believe that the town's violent past, which includes the numerous killings and deaths that occurred in its heyday, have left behind a lingering spiritual energy that continues to haunt the town today. In our number 7 spot today, we have the CPR Hospital. The abandoned CPR Hospital is located in Saskatchewan, here in Canada, my home province, and it's a different kind of CPR than you might be thinking. In its past life, this hospital was once a hospital for Canadian Pacific Railway workers in the early 1900s. The hospital closed its doors in the 1980s and has been abandoned ever since. Today, the hospital is a popular spot for ghost hunters and urban explorers, with many reports of strange occurrences and ghostly sightings. Visitors to the hospital have reported hearing strange noises, including the sound of footsteps and the disembodied voices of former patients and staff. Some have even reported seeing apparitions, including the ghostly figure of a former nurse who died in a tragic accident. The hospital's haunting history is thought to be linked to the many tragedies that occurred during its time as a working hospital. Whether or not the hospital is truly haunted remains up for debate, but its eerie atmosphere and mysterious past continue to draw visitors from far and wide. In our number 6 spot today, we have Bodie. Bodie, which is located in California, is a former mining town that is now a ghost town and state historic park. The town was established in 1859 and was the home to a thriving gold rush community until the early 1900s, when the mines began to close. The town's isolation and very harsh living conditions made it a very difficult place to live, and it was eventually abandoned. The remaining buildings, which have been preserved in a state of quote arrested decay, make it a popular spot for tourists and ghost hunters alike. Visitors to Bodie have reported hearing strange noises, feeling cold spots, and even, of course, seeing a ghost or two. Some believe that the town's violent history, which includes shootouts and executions, has caused it to become haunted. Others believe that the spirits of former residents still roam the streets, unable to let go of their former lives. Bodie's haunting history and well-preserved buildings make it a fascinating but very eerie place to visit. In our number 5 spot today, we have Val-Jalbert. The abandoned village of Val-Jalbert, located in Quebec, Canada, was once a thriving pulp mill town in the 1920s. However, after the mill closed in the 1940s, the town was abandoned and left to decay. Today, the village is a very popular spot for tourists and explorers, with many reports of strange occurrences and ghostly sightings. Visitors to Val-Jalbert have reported feeling a sense of unease and hearing strange noises, including whispers and footsteps. I think that whispers is like the worst. No, voices is one thing, whispers is worse. There are also rumors of a ghostly figure that haunts the village's church, as well as other apparitions that have been spotted throughout the abandoned buildings. Many people believe that the town's tragic history, which includes a devastating fire and several deaths, has caused it to become haunted. The abandoned village of Val-Jalbert is a fascinating and eerie place to visit, and its haunting history and ghostly tales continue to intrigue visitors from around the world. In our number 4 spot today, we have Six Flags New Orleans. Six Flags New Orleans, of course located in Louisiana, was once a very popular theme park that closed its doors after Hurricane Katrina devastated the area in 2005. Since then, the park has been abandoned and left to decay, leading many to believe that it is haunted. Visitors to the park have reported hearing strange noises and seeing ghostly apparitions, including the ghost of a former employee who is said to have died on the property. There are also rumors of ghostly figures that can be seen walking through the abandoned park at night. While many of the park's attractions have been dismantled at this point, some of the structures still stand, including the abandoned roller coasters and the very creepy, dilapidated clown head that once served as the park's entrance. The park's haunting history and eerie atmosphere have made it a very popular destination for urban explorers and ghost hunters alike. However, visitors are warned that the property is unsafe and trespassing is strictly prohibited. In our number 3 spot today, we have the Central Experimental Farm. Located in Ottawa, Ontario, this farm is a research facility that has been in operation since 1886. However, despite its scientific purpose, the farm has a reputation for being haunted. Visitors to the farm have reported seeing ghosts, hearing unexplained noises, and also feeling an eerie presence. Some of the most commonly reported sightings include the ghostly figure of a former farm worker who died on the property, as well as the ghost of a woman who is said to haunt the farm's historic farmhouse. There are also rumors of a ghostly horse-drawn carriage that can be seen driving through the farm's fields. While the exact reason for the farm's haunting remains unknown, many believe that the many tragedies that have occurred on the property, including accidents and deaths, have left behind a lingering spiritual energy. The Central Experimental Farm is a fascinating and eerie location, and its haunting history and the ghostly tales surrounding it continue to intrigue visitors from around the world. In our number 2 spot today, we have Centralia. Located in Pennsylvania, this town is often referred to as one of the gateways to hell. That is due to the fire that spread in an underground coal mine underneath the town in 1962. The fire, which is believed to have been started by a trash fire that spread to the coal seam, has been burning for over 60 years and has caused the town to be evacuated due to toxic fumes and the risk of collapse. As the fire still blazes underground, it causes the smoke and poisonous gases to rise up from the ground, not only causing an eerie appearance, but also a very serious health hazard. The temperatures can be so hot in the area that one guy's backyard was measured at 626 degrees Fahrenheit. Sometimes the fire will also burn through supports underground, which in the end turns into a sinkhole. This has caused pets, wildlife, and residents to unsuspectingly get swallowed up into the hole. In 1984, the US government ordered a total evacuation of the town, but a handful of residents refused to leave and even went to court over the right to stay in the town for as long as they live. The abandoned buildings, cracked and buckled roads, and just eerie silence makes it a popular spot for urban explorers and paranormal enthusiasts. Some believe that the town's dark history combined with the ongoing fire has caused the area to become haunted. Finally, in our number 1 spot today, we have the Eastern State Penitentiary. The Eastern State Penitentiary, located located in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, is known for its haunting history. The prison was operational for almost 150 years from 1829 until its closure in 1971, and it was once the home to some of the country's most notorious criminals, including Al Capone. The prison's imposing Gothic architecture and innovative design, which placed an emphasis on solitary confinement and rehabilitation, made it one of the most famous prisons of its time. However, its harsh conditions and notorious history also make it a popular spot for ghost hunters and people who love all things paranormal. Visitors have reported hearing strange noises, feeling cold spots, and even seeing ghosts, including the ghost of a guard who was killed by an inmate. Some even claim to have been touched or pushed by unseen forces. The prison's eerie atmosphere and dark history continue to fascinate as well as frighten visitors to this day.
Coming in at number 10 is Fort Delaware. Fort Delaware, built in the 19th century to protect the ports of Wilmington and Philadelphia, served as a prison camp for Confederate prisoners of war during the Civil War. Almost 13,000 prisoners were held at one time, and around 33,000 were kept there in total over the course of the war. Now, conditions were rough, and around 2,500 men died at the fort. The fort was then abandoned towards the end of World War II and became a state park in 1951. Today, it is extremely haunted. It's rumored that throughout the parade grounds, Confederate spirits roam, still trying to escape from the fort. One of the most popular stories is of an attempted escape from a Confederate drummer boy. Legend has it he tried to fake his own death in order to be transported back across the river in a coffin. Waiting on him on the other side of the river were either sympathetic Union troops or fellow inmates who were supposed to free him from the coffin. Unfortunately, a shift change SWAT personnel, and instead of being freed, the boy was buried alive. Now, there's also a photograph that was taken of a ghost there who's called the Blue Man, and this place is just filled with ghosts roaming around. Number 9. Poinsett Bridge. Poinsett Bridge is the oldest bridge in South Carolina and perhaps the entire southeastern United States. According to local folklore, Poinsett Bridge was built on the site of an old Indian burial ground dating back to when Cherokees were the only inhabitants of the mountains of the Carolinas, Georgia, and Tennessee. With this, it's no shock that this place is haunted. Other stories go that some of the men who worked to build Poinsett Bridge died during the bridge's construction due to a variety of illnesses, one of which was malaria. These men were then supposedly buried under and even within the bridge itself. Now, according to one legend, a slave was once hung under Poinsett Bridge and his ghost still haunts it, said resident Doris Davis. The bridge is haunted by those who helped build it but got none of Joel Poinsett's glory. The ghosts of the slaves who died during construction sometimes reappear as lights in the surrounding woods and on the bridge itself after dusk and hover in mid-air for a few seconds and then vanish. Number 6. Emily's Bridge. Emily's Bridge in Stowe, Vermont is a 50-foot long bridge that's said to be the site of a young woman's death in the mid-1800s. According to legend, the woman, Emily, was supposed to meet her lover at the bridge to elope, but she ended up hanging herself from the rafters when he never showed up. Today, Emily's ghost is said to haunt the site, and instead of being full of sorrow, she's full of vengeance, as it's been reported that she claws at passing cars and even scratches the backs of pedestrians until they bleed. There are slightly less menacing spooks as well, like images of a white apparition and strange voices and footsteps coming from the tunnel. Number 5. Letchworth Village. Letchworth Village, located in New York, is a complex that used to be a mental institution from 1911 to 1996. Now, like most mental institutions, it closed after controversial experience on mental patients were condemned. The village, at the height of treatment in the 1960s, employed more than 10,000 locals who oversaw the patients on the grounds. Letchworth Village's reputation began its downward spiral in 1972 when journalist Geraldo Rivera published an expose on the cruel practices at Letchworth. Some things he revealed were, from the 1930s to 60s, Letchworth was a testing ground and then a frequent utilizer of electroconvulsive shock therapy, both as a treatment model and to see what effects it had on the brains of the feeble-minded morons, imbeciles, and idiots, to use the official medical terms of the times. Now, most of these patients didn't survive, or they ended up far worse than they started. In the 1930s and 40s, tree panning and lobotomies, physical and chemical, were carried out in secret, often as a part of research studies. More than 800 people died as a result of mistreatment or experimentation, and they were buried in unmarked graves at the far end of the Letchworth the property. Number 4. The Shanghai Tunnels. The Shanghai Tunnels in Portland were built by Chinese workers during the time when Chinatown was the center for trade business. The tunnel's original design was for transporting goods from cargo ships to the inner city. By using the tunnels, the ship's crew could avoid the hassle of inner city traffic. Now, the tunnels get their name for the practice of kidnapping and selling men as workers on ships headed to East Asia. Restless, agitated spirits of men who were drugged and trafficked in the city ports during the early 19th century are said to haunt the underground tunnels, through which they were reportedly sold. Legend has it that local saloons contained entrances to the tunnels, enabling swindlers to prey on unsuspecting patrons and bring them directly underground before they even knew what was going on. Now, deep within the tunnels, travelers have reported feeling goosebumps as if someone is watching them from the shadows. Many people report seeing an Asian man walking past them in the tunnels, and explorers name the spirit Sam and say that he is responsible for turning off the lights in the bar basements. Sam also likes to move things around in the tunnels as explorers walk by. Now, up until 2023, visitors could also take walking tours to learn more about the dark history of the tunnels, but the tours have ended indefinitely. Number 3. Northern State Mental Hospital. Northern State Mental Hospital in Washington operated from 1912 to 1976. Like countless other mental asylums of the time, grisly experiments were performed on patients, some of which have even been rumored to be part of the top secret government program MK Ultra. Now, patients were being subjected to treatments like insulin shock therapy, lobotomies, and electroshock therapy. Heavy sedation with powerful drugs was also a common form of treatment, but truly it was just to keep patients in line and submissive. Now, countless patients died here, and rarely were the bodies claimed by families, so their disposal was left to the state. According to hospital records, 1,487 bodies are buried on the grounds of the asylum. The Washington state legislature cut off funding to the asylum, and in 1976, Northern State officially closed its doors. Now, with so much suffering, death, and disregard for human life, the place is just straight up haunted. Most of those who were admitted weren't actually suffering from severe mental illness and were sent to the asylum to live out the rest of their lives under lock and key. Those who dare visit the asylum grounds report strange phenomena such as cold spots, the feeling of being watched, disembodied voices, and the feeling of being touched. Now, some have seen strange shadows darting around the graveyard. Now, the most commonly encountered entity is that of a young girl with a red ball and a man chasing after her. They've been seen running around the property, though some report the girl standing alone in the graveyard as well. Number 2. Lake Shawnee Amusement Park. Lake Shawnee Amusement Park in West Virginia is full of history. Legend has it that this land in Rock, West Virginia was once occupied by the Clay family, whose sons and daughters were kidnapped and had their lives ended by Native Americans, while the father, Mitchell Clay, was out hunting. Lake Shawnee Amusement Park opened in 1926 and was abandoned 40 years later after a girl died on the swing set and a boy drowned in the pond. In 1985, Gaylord White, a former employee of the park, purchased the land with plans to reopen it, but those dreams were put to a stop after human remains were found buried on the property. There were 13 skeletons in total. White believes the premises to be haunted and says he's seen the girl who met her fatal end after a truck backed into her on the swings. And coming at number 1 is Summerwind Mansion. Summerwind Mansion in Wisconsin is believed to be one of the most haunted places in the US. This abandoned building is located on the shores of West Bay Lake in Vilas County on private land. The Lama were the owners of this mansion, and for 15 years of their occupancy, they experienced strange things. In the mid-1930s, as the family was busy dining, the door to the basement opened with a man appearing out of thin air. Limit shot at the spirit twice and chased him back into the cellar. The family later moved out, leaving the mansion empty until the 1970s when Arnold and Ginger Hinshaw purchased the building to turn it into a dream home. However, the paranormal activity chased the crew away, and the Hinshaws then took the renovation work into their own hands. Even then, the strange happenings did not stop. One night, Mary, Arnold's daughter, found a human skull and a handful of black hair in a hidden crawl space, which mysteriously disappeared when the police decided to investigate the house years later. The Hinshaws started behaving abnormally, and strange things still happen at that mansion, even after its destruction by lightning that occurred in 1988, leaving much of it completely destroyed.
Scientists and archaeologists are constantly making all kinds of incredible discoveries, but some of them are bound to be on the spooky side of things. So today we're talking about some of the creepiest burial sites, mummies, you name it. You'll even get to hear the voice of a 3,000-year-old dead guy, so stick around for that. We're going to start things off though with bog body. This is about as unsettling as it sounds. Bog is just such a gross word. Bog. Nothing good could ever come out of a bog. So bog bodies are human remains that were preserved in peat bogs. And peat bogs are these wet, swampy areas with a ton of decomposed plant material. The acidic and oxygen-deprived conditions in bogs can actually keep bodies from completely rotting away, so they actually kinda get mummified. Turns out a lot of ancient cultures in Northern Europe used to bury their dead this way in order to preserve them. Archaeologists in Scotland, Ireland, Sweden, the Netherlands have come across some of these eerie bog bodies, and some of them are incredibly old. The oldest found to date being the Val-Jalbert Man in Denmark, dated to 8000 BCE. Some of the remains are just skeletons now, but there are a surprising amount that are so well preserved you can actually see their facial features, hair, and even their clothes. There's a bit of a mystery about these corpses as well. It's not entirely clear why some bodies would have been buried this way. Some researchers think they were victims of sacrifices or rituals, or they met their end through some ancient form of justice. Up next on the list we have the unluckiest man. Just look at this poor sap. This is the remains of a man who clearly met a very unfortunate end during the volcanic disaster in Pompeii. You could say everyone in Pompeii was incredibly unlucky, but this guy, whole other level. I mean, as horrific as this must have been, that image of the skeleton crushed under the rock, just with the feet sticking out, it's almost so awful. Kind of goes all the way around to being funny. I don't know, there's something comedically cartoony about it. It's very Bugs Bunny. When this guy was first discovered though, scientists thought the eruption of Mount Vesuvius had hurled a boulder into the air, crushing him as he attempted to flee. Pretty awful, but it would have been pretty quick, right? I mean, you get crushed by a boulder, you pretty much die instantly, especially if it's your head. Their initial assumption was wrong though. Scientists removed the boulder only to discover that the guy's skull was still completely intact, so it didn't crush his body like they initially thought. He would have likely died of asphyxiation, which I think would have been a much worse way to go. Would have been a lot slower. So yeah, poor guy. Rukpund Lake. Back in 1942, a forest ranger discovered hundreds of human skeletons at the bottom of this glacial lake. Not just a few, we're talking about a whole bunch of bones. So how did these poor souls end up there? Some say it was a group of pilgrims caught in a sudden and violent hailstorm. Others think it was an army that got caught in the crossfire of some ancient battle, and the bodies were dumped in the lake. Then there's the folklore. Locals have about a legendary goddess, Nanda Devi, getting angry and unleashing her wrath on those who dared to trespass her sacred territory. Recent studies have actually revealed that there's not just one event that led to the skeletons at the bottom of the lake though. Different groups of people met their mysterious fate at different times. In 2003, a team from National Geographic retrieved several bones from the lake and discovered that there were actually still small amounts of flesh attached to some of them. I think this lake is just cursed. I'd stay far away from it. Alright, if I ever find myself in Italy, which I really hope I do one day, I gotta add this place to my list of destinations. Capuchin Crypt in Sicily. This is a burial site, but instead of your typical graveyard where all the bodies are stored underground and out of view, this place has them right out in the open. Rows upon rows of skeletons and mummies, all still wearing the clothing of their time, line the walls, and tourists can walk through the place and look at them. Located beneath the Capuchin Monastery in Palermo, the catacombs have been in use since the 16th century. They were first intended for the burial of Capuchin friars, but over time, many of the local elite wanted to be stored there and started paying to have their remains kept in the crypt when they died. The catacombs are divided into various sections. One of these sections is the Rosalia Lombardo Chapel, named after a 2-year-old girl whose body is remarkably well preserved, eerily so. The bodies are arranged along the walls or just displayed in open coffins. It's certainly eerie, but pretty fascinating, especially seeing them still wearing the clothing that would have been common when they died. Just makes you remember that these were real individuals with their own stories, families, and lives, rather than, a tombstone with a name and a bunch of bones 6 feet underground out of view. Next on the list, we have the discovery of a mass grave containing the remains of 54 Viking men. So in 2009, archaeologists in Dorset were excavating land where a new road was going to be constructed, the Weymouth Relief Road. While this excavation was taking place, they stumbled on this shallow mass grave containing the remains of 54 men who they later realized had been Vikings. They were all decapitated. The bodies had been haphazardly tossed into the grave, and the heads had been placed in a pile off to the side. They'd likely attempted a raid on an Anglo-Saxon territory and were unsuccessful, being rounded up and meeting their grisly ends at the hand of a sword. But it was clear that these hadn't been quick, merciless deaths. There were multiple wounds on the men, aside from, their heads having been detached from their shoulders. One skull even had a large hole at the top, meaning it had likely been lobbed off, exposing the man's brain before he died. And one guy even had his fingers sliced off. He likely tried to grab the sword as it was coming down. Pretty awesome. Anyway, seemed like a really fun time to be alive back then, doesn't it? All right, we've talked about Vikings, mummies, and an unlucky man. Now let's move on to vampires, or at least people who were believed to have been vampires. These folks were pretty unlucky too. Vampire burials have been discovered in various parts of the world. These were basically any burial aimed at preventing the dead from returning from the dead as vampires or revenants. There are, of course, tons of different beliefs throughout many different cultures, but one reason someone could have come back as a supposed vampire was if they suffered a particularly cruel death or were believed to be out of their minds when they were alive, for example. The point is, there were all kinds of methods used in order to prevent them from returning from the grave. In some cases, corpses were buried with bricks or stones placed in their mouths. This was believed to prevent the deceased from rising and feasting on the blood of the living. The idea was that the brick or stone would inhibit the vampire's ability to bite and feed, because they just wouldn't be able to just take it out for whatever reason. Pretty pathetic attempt there to stop a vampire. Another method involved placing a sickle or another sharp object across the throat or waist of the deceased in the grave. This one's pretty obvious. It's a trap! The corpse wakes up, goes to get up, and oops, there goes its head. It's a much better plan, I think. In some cultures, bodies were buried with heavy stones placed on top of them. Again, pretty simple idea behind that one. And some burials involve just physically securing the coffin to prevent the supposed vampire from escaping. Nails or other fasteners were used to seal the coffin. Next, we have the recent discovery of plastic rocks. So scientists studying Brazil's Trindade Island, a very important nesting site for green turtles, have made a pretty alarming discovery. Many of the rocks on the island are now intertwined with melted plastic, forming a new type of rock called plastiglomeratus. Kinda messed up, really shows the extent of human influence on our planet. Fernanda Avalar Santos, a geologist from the Federal University of Paraná, and her team conducted chemical tests to identify the types of plastics that were in these rocks. The primary source of pollution they found is fishing nets, which are common debris in Trindade Island beaches. These nets, which are dragged by marine currents and accumulate on the beach, melt and blend with the natural materials of the beach when temperatures rise. Trindade Island is a crucial conservation spot for green turtles, attracting thousands each year for egg laying. The island is mostly uninhabited, with only members of the Brazilian Navy present, maintaining a base and protecting the nesting turtles. The plastic-infused rocks were discovered in a protected area near the turtle nesting grounds. Santos said that this finding is pretty unsettling. The plastic pollution, mismanagement of waste, and garbage in the oceans are now becoming intertwined with geological material. That is really bizarre. Crazy. Next on the list, we have the Necromancers Cave. How awesome does that sound? How can I not put that on the list? Necromancers Cave? In 2009, archaeologists exploring Toimim Cave in Jerusalem made a really cool discovery. Deep in the cave, they found human skulls, oil lamps, and bronze daggers. It doesn't take an archaeologist to piece together that there were some rituals going on here, but these rituals were more specifically related to necromancy, the art of communicating communicating with the dead, and that I would not have been able to guess. The exact findings included 120 oil lamps dating back to the late 2nd to 4th centuries CE. The lamps were intentionally placed in hidden, hard-to-reach crevices, which seemed to imply they weren't just used to light up the cave. Along with the lamps were weapons like daggers and axe heads, and 3 human skulls. No other human bones were found. Ancient papyrus scrolls from the same era detailed spells and customs honoring the cave. These included instructions on restraining and sealing the mouths of skulls and raising spirits with skulls. The researchers put together that these spells actually aligned with the artifacts found in the cave. At the time, the cave was thought to be a portal to the underworld. The oil lamps, including the 120 that were discovered, were believed to lure spirits to the realm of the living. Alright, ever wanted to know what a mummy sounds like? Well, we're getting pretty close. Just back in 2020, researchers set out to replicate the voice of Egyptian priest Nesaimun, who's been housed in the Leeds City Museum since 1823. So how did they recreate the voice of a man who's been dead for 3,000 years? Well, they digitally recreated all his mouth parts and then 3D printed it. That's my simple way of explaining it. Then they used one of those electro links voice box things, what I wanted to talk through like this, and then fed it through the 3D printed mouth, and you get this. Kind of sounds exactly what I picture a mummy sounding like, to be honest. Like, you know? And finally, we have evidence of people being fed to vicious animals. It's not like that's unheard of in history, in the history of our species, but finding physical evidence of this is pretty fascinating. In recent digs in Teotihuacan, the ancient Mesoamerican city in Mexico, archaeologists stumbled upon something pretty wild. Among a bunch of unearthed remains of predatory animals, mostly big cats, were also human bones, which has a pretty dark implication. People were fed to these animals. Now, what were these animals being kept for? Likely for sacrificial rituals. So they kept the animals alive for a time by tossing in some very unlucky human beings their way. The question is, were they dead already, or were they fed to the animals while they were still alive, possibly as a form of punishment? California, it's basically known as the epicenter for the American dream, the glitz and glam of Hollywood, the glorious sunshine, but there is a darker side to the Golden State. So today, we're looking at some of the creepiest abandoned places in California. We're starting off our trip to the Golden State with the Gates of Hell in Hacienda Heights. What is known as the Gates of Hell is this big barbed wire fence surrounding a piece of property that is rumored to have been a sanatorium back in the 40s. The story goes that this hospital had been shut down due to malpractice. And there are other stories that the building beyond this fence was the home of Satan worshippers who practiced all kinds of dark rituals on the property. As to how this rumor got started, well, beyond this ominous barbed wire fence is the back entrance to a building. Those few who have managed to sneak a glimpse of it have apparently seen all sorts of pentagrams and cultish symbols drawn all over it, and peeking inside the windows, you can supposedly see red stains covering the inside. Now, these could just be nothing more than made-up stories, but many people claim to have this uneasy feeling that washes over them when they pass by this gate. There has to be some reason for that barbed wire keeping people out, or maybe it's there to keep something in. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. By the way, we have awesome content coming your way on the daily. Alright, the notorious Bohemian Grove. Bohemian Grove is a private campground located in Monte Rio, California. It's known for hosting an annual invite-only retreat for members of the Bohemian Club, a private men's club that only allows highfalutin men from fields in politics, business, and the arts. Now, the area isn't always closed off to the public, just when this annual gathering takes place. And what goes on in these gatherings at Bohemian Grove is incredibly secretive. And there are very strict rules in place for members about maintaining this secrecy. The most famous event at Bohemian Grove is said to be the cremation of care ceremony, which is a symbolic ritual performed in front of a large owl-shaped statue. Nobody, other than the members, of course, know what this ritual entails. But you have a bunch of powerful people meeting in the middle of the woods in secret, performing ceremonies. No surprise why most people on the outside find this incredibly suspect. I don't know. Let your mind go wild. Do they sacrifice a poor person every year and then drink their blood while dancing in the nude around the big owl statue? That's what I picture. I picture Wicker Man type stuff going on. Like, what needs to be so secret about a camping trip? I've never been roasting marshmallows and catching fish in the woods with my buddies and turned to them and been like, guys, this stays in the woods here. None of this gets out. All right, the hidden city under Mount Shasta. Now, unlike everything else you'll see on this list, this place is only rumored to exist, but the story behind it is pretty fascinating. According to the legend, there's said to be this hidden underground city or a network of tunnels beneath the majestic Mount Shasta in Northern California. There are a few different versions of this legend, but the gist is that there's this hidden city inhabited by an advanced and enlightened civilization. Some say they're remnants of an ancient civilization, extraterrestrial beings, or even spiritually advanced beings known as Lemurians. Lemuria is a mythical lost continent in the Pacific, kinda in the same vein as Atlantis, and according to the legend, Lemurians found refuge in the tunnels beneath the mountain after their continent sank into the ocean. There have also been a good number of UFO sightings around Mount Shasta and people who have claimed to actually encounter the underground city, like the prospector J.C. Brown, who claimed to discover the city back in 1904. He said he'd found a cave that sloped down 11 miles while prospecting for gold, and inside the cave he found an entire city filled with gold and artifacts like shields and weapons, even the remains of large mummified humanoids, some of which were 10 feet tall. Brown didn't come out with his story until years later, telling a man named John C. Root about his tale. John gathered a search team, but on the day the group was supposed to meet, J.C. Brown apparently didn't show up. Not only that though, he was never seen or heard from again. So I don't know, did he actually show up? And they went down there, they found the stuff, and then they were like, we want the gold to ourselves, and like took him out maybe? Who knows? Next on the list is Ano Nuevo Island. This place hasn't always been an island. It used to be connected to the mainland through a narrow strip of land that acted as a bridge, but water levels rose, eventually cutting it off. All that sits on this piece of land now are a handful of abandoned buildings and the residence, which used to be the home of a lighthouse keeper. The lighthouse is gone now, but the keeper is said to still linger in the afterlife anyway. The island is completely abandoned and off limits, now a protected wildlife preserve, home to seals and sea lions, but some say that on certain nights they've seen the windows of the old lighthouse keeper's home light up as if someone or something still looms over the island, keeping watch. In the LA suburb of Downey sits a fenced-off, boarded-up set of homes and buildings known as the Old LA County Poor Farm. The history of this place dates back to 1887, when the LA County Board of Supervisors decided to create a facility for the homeless. They bought 124 acres of farmland near Downey, functioned as a place for them to stay but also to work. It was a working farm with buildings to house residents, offices, and even common areas. Over the years, the farm expanded to around 400 acres by 1910 and produced a variety of crops and livestock. It was a self-sustaining operation, providing food for residents and selling all the excess produce for profit. Like, what an awesome idea. We need stuff like this today. Things eventually changed, of course, though. In 1915, a new superintendent took charge. The Great Depression also brought its challenges, with funding drying up and a tent city being constructed. During World War II, part of the place became an army base, and after the war, the facility evolved into a hospital, abandoning the farm aspect by the 50s. And then by the 80s, the aging hospital moved to a new facility across the street, leaving the old poor farm abandoned. It's now completely off limits to the public, surrounded by no trespassing signs and barbed wire fences. Creepy story though. In 2006, the military came to the area for a training exercise, and Marines stumbled upon a freezer containing tons of mummified body parts, likely from the hospital, but that's still really creepy. The Point Sur Lighthouse is surrounded by ghostly tales. It was constructed in 1889, helping to navigate vessels along the Big Sur coastline. One tale about this place is that the original lighthouse keeper continues to watch over the tower till this day. Future keepers have had the creepy experience of being all alone in the tower at night, only to hear labored footsteps ascending the stairs and the sounds of huffs and puffs coming from the stairs. But when they've called out to ask who's there or to go and look, the stairway is completely empty. There are also stories about a woman in a vintage dress wandering near the lighthouse, and some say she's the spirit of a woman who died in a shipwreck. Next on the list is the Lincoln Heights Jail. This was a pretty notorious jail. Big names like Al Capone used to be housed here. The jail has been around since 1931. It was originally constructed to hold about 625 prisoners, but by the 50s it was packing in about 2,800 folks. You can only imagine what the conditions were like in that place. And in the 50s and 60s, when LA was cracking down on LGBT activity, the place became known for something else. Cops were going after queer individuals, making arrests, and the prison had its own separate wing just for these prisoners. In 1965, the city decided to shut the facility down. It sat empty for ages, with people tossing around ideas for renovations, a trade school, a rooftop garden. In 1979, the Bilingual Foundation for the Arts moved in, but by 2014, it was abandoned yet again. Fast forward to 2017, the city wanted ideas to revive the place. The Lincoln Property Company and 15 Group got the nod to turn it into a Lincoln Heights Makers District. Public market, amphitheater, all that kind of jazz, but the place ended up being really tough to renovate. It was full of hazardous material, decay, and getting the place up to current environmental standards was tough. So the project was ultimately abandoned, and the place still sits empty to this day. Next up, we have the Sunken City. This spot is completely off limits to the public, although you probably wouldn't think it with how many people fart around in the place. The Sunken City is located in San Pedro and got its name in 1929 when a landslide caused a part of the coastline to plunge into the ocean. This left behind this series of concrete foundations, streets, and sidewalks that now sit below the cliffs. The area became popular for how eerie and surreal the landscape is. Even though it's been technically closed off to the public since '87, because of safety concerns, people were climbing the unstable cliffs and it became a liability. They're not supposed to go wandering around there, and the city has to put up fences and signs to make sure everyone gets the message. Trespassing can result in fines or even arrests, but people continue to sneak in. When I say people, I mean like young people. Let's be real. It looks beautiful though. There's palm trees, really cool looking graffiti. I get why people would want to check it out, but apparently it can be pretty dangerous. Forget the fines, people often get mugged here or worse. Let's talk about Murphy Ranch, sitting in the hills near Los Angeles. So back in the 30s, a couple with some pretty unconventional ideas decided to build a self-sufficient compound there. And by unconventional ideas, I mean they were incredibly anti-Semitic. They thought the world was headed for some major chaos, and seeing as World War II was looming, kinda was, so they built this compound, which ended up becoming something of a base for American Third Reich sympathizers during the Second World War. The compound had living quarters, a power station, and even a water storage system. It was a haven for them and other like-minded pricks, but the US government got wind of it and shut it down in 1941, the day after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. The remains of Murphy Ranch now sit completely abandoned and completely off limits. Old dilapidated buildings and graffiti-covered walls are all that remain. Yes, graffiti, people still do sneak in. Next on the list we have Alcatraz. This is one of the most notorious former prisons in the entire world. The amount of stories about this place is damn near endless, and it's said that some of the former prisoners still linger within the building till this day. Back in the 1850s, it started as a military setup, housing soldiers, but then in 1934, it switched gears and became a high-security prison, holding big-name crooks like Al Capone and George Machine Gun Kelly. Life on Alcatraz was no joke for inmates. They faced solitary confinement, hard labor, and punishment was incredibly tough. On top of that, the place was said to be this impossible area to escape, being out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by ice-cold water. Oddly enough, though, there were actually multiple escape attempts here, a whopping 14 to be exact. The most famous attempt was in 1962 when Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers disappeared into thin air. Some say they actually made it to shore, started new lives in secret, but others think they drowned in the frigid water. Others who tried weren't as lucky. Guards shot some or just caught him before they even got that far.
And off the number 10 is 17 Hours. This sort of reminds me of the book called Touching the Void, where these these two guys are climbing this glacier or mountain, and something goes wrong and one of them has to cut the rope and let the other one loose, otherwise they were both gonna die, and the one who gets cut off lands in this crevice and actually survives. Either way, this one was shared by Reddit user Beach Knoll, whose grandpa had just gotten back from World War II and decided exploring was his new hobby. Him and his friends went into Mammoth Cave despite it being on privately owned property. Laws were a lot more lax back then, clearly. Either way, while in there with their flashlights, they had a group of people somewhere else in the cave because of all the echoing. They quickly cut the lights since the sounds didn't seem very friendly, and they waited. His grandpa and friends went deeper into the cave to lose them, and imagine this level of darkness where you can't even see your own hand in front of you. It's like a black hole with just no light coming in. They then spent 17 hours in there hiding, and the only thing getting them through it was one of their friends saying, "We didn't survive that to die in here," obviously referring to the war. And no, you didn't, my friend, so you're gonna survive that. Coming in at number 9 is a secret society. This one's from Reddit user Ludovico Specs and was about the basement that was under his college language lab. Turns out the place was turned into some sort of secret society in the 1800s, and the whole building used to belong to them at one point. It had hospital lights all over it, which were always just very creepy. There's an inch of water on the floor too, but the weirdest part was the main room. It had vaulted ceilings supported by pillars that had stone skulls mounted on top of them. On top of the skulls were metal spikes, which is just sus as well. Why would the secret society need just skulls on poles? It's weird. The front room also had this also the backstage area that had a chair with a bunch of questions written on it, like were they a secret society or a cult? Now the user thought his discovery was pretty cool, so he came back the next night with some of his friends to show them. The night after that, he tried coming back again, but it had been mysteriously padlocked. No one wanted him snooping, evidently. And number 8, we have the closet. This one would have sent me running for the hills and was shared by You See The Thing Is on Reddit. The police had confiscated this house from a biker gang a few years back, and it had sat empty ever since. So the user, who works at an insurance company, had to go to the house and assess its damage. We already know insurance people always screw you over, so okay. Now while in there, he described the house as pretty normal, you know, white walls, red plywood flooring, the door locks weren't rusted yet, so it was all pretty good, pretty normal. But then they opened the linen closet to see deep scratch marks all over the inside and dents like someone was trying to escape from inside of there. The worst part was that right on the back wall was this red splatter that had been painted over but was still very visible. The user's thoughts went to the person finally escaping to then somehow getting in the head, which is beyond screwed up, but I mean the scratch marks, the dents, like it makes sense. Filling at number 7 slot is Choo Choo. Now this one was shared by Reddit user Hi Dingy Doo, who shared that he used to walk along this old abandoned railroad line just to observe some wildlife, which sounds really peaceful actually, and I'm sure it was until this encounter. Over the years, the metal tracks rusted and were taken out, and all the equipment was also taken away. The whole thing became overgrown with shrubs and weeds, and so to an outside perspective, you never really would have been able to tell it had been a train track ever. Either way, one night the user went walking there with a friend, and out of nowhere they hear a voice saying choo choo. Hitting themselves, they turned around to see this old smiling man crouched in the bushes just staring at them from the dark shadows, like, who the hell are you, bro? Like, I'm just trying to vibe and observe some wildlife, like, who the frick are you? Oh hell no! I would have literally just kicked the old man. I'm really not as violent as you guys think I am, but like, I will kick people if I have to. I'm not even worried about it. Now at number 6 are the cats. This one makes my blood boil and was shared by Redditor Jetstream Wolf 12. They shared that there's this one hotel in their hometown that's super run down and that everyone just kind of breaks into fun. So they and 2 friends decided to crawl into the basement from a side entrance. Initially all they saw was graffiti, but as they went upstairs they saw blood stains all over the floor. Was someone murdered there? Find out in a second. Now they see a bunch of dead cats that have been dragged around this room and come to the realization it's their blood. That was all they had to see before running the frick out of there, like no 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 no. That would have been me before some serial killer in the back just like hits me like she was annoying. Coming in at number 5 is the ice plant. This one was shared by Redditor Digital is 303, who was very into urban exploration as a teenager. See, I was more into Gossip Girl and reading than I was exploring abandoned buildings, but to each their own. I never judge. Outwardly. Now either way, there was this old ice plant near the user's house that had burned down 35 to 30 years beforehand, which is very ironic. You're an ice plant and you burned it down. Bit of shocking behavior. Either way, the place was super overgrown, and as the user was exploring the mangled concrete and rebar, everything seemed just normal and old and burned. Disappointed, the user went home, but a few days later they hear that a corpse was pulled out of the plant by the police. The user had literally walked past a dead body and had no idea. Like, dude, open your eyes or your nose. How do you not smell a dead corpse? Apparently they smell like proper shit. Like, was your nose blocked that day, bro? What's going on? At number 4 is the cleanup. Abandoned mental hospitals are one place you will just absolutely never find me. Too much pain and suffering has been endured in these places, especially from the way they used to be treated. So this one comes from Reddit user Slothcopter, who said they explored this abandoned mental hospital that opened up sometime in the 1800s. They opened this freezer inside to find mold all over it and inside of it, and in the past they had used it to put dead bodies in there. So did those bodies mold? Did the mold come from something else? I don't know. Now in another hallway they found the word blood written in blood since they had it tested, and the word high written in spray paint, which clearly meant others had explored this place before this person did. Which is not surprising since urban explorers will literally do everything except like meth. Either way, the person decided to visit the place again a few days later, and when they did, the blood was mysteriously gone, but the high was still there. So who's coming in and out of this place and leaving messages in blood and then cleaning them up? Filling at number 3 slot is the Sprinter. This one comes from a now deleted Reddit user who went to explore an abandoned school in his town with a few of his friends. It was really hard to get into since the whole thing was boarded up, but they managed to climb up a pipe on the side of the school and get in through a window. They checked out the basement first that had been flooded, so it was very eerie just watching the stairs disappear underwater. They then checked out the gym, and as they were leaving it, they heard single footsteps coming from the other side of the gym door. Now that scared the shit out of them since this person or thing was blocking their roof exit, trajectory. The person sounded like they were just periodically walking around and then stopping, not even properly exploring. There was no light where they were coming from, which spooked the group even more. The group decided to hide out for a bit, and after seeing no one in the hallways, they decided to make a break for the roof exit door. As soon as they did, they heard someone sprinting after them, not even that far behind them. They ran the hell up those stairs and managed to get out without getting caught or killed by whoever was in there. Bro, why were you in there alone, you creep? Now at number 2 is quitting your job. This one was effed and came from Redditor Takausin, who said this happened around 13 years ago. As an electrician, him and his partner were sent out to this restoration project for a house that was built in the early 1900s. Now when they got there, they were told some info about the house, like how it had 2 owners since it was built, and how the last one was this old woman who passed away a decade prior, and there was no one left in her family that could take it. So it was auctioned off to this young couple who wanted to modernize the whole place, which is very understandable. So they got to work installing things and had to open the attic hatch to find out it was very cramped as hell up there, and so only the tiniest worker could go up and replace the intake cable. Now the user was the smallest, obviously, so he went up there and could smell this old people smell, so he just assumed it was like her death smell, but it kept getting stronger. When he got up there fully, the stench was awful, and when he turned his flashlight on, to the left of him, he saw 5 cat carcasses, some partially eaten by insects or whatever eat corpses, and the others were just bones and rotten skin. The dude had just had his lunch break, so he threw up on the spot and actually quit his job after this project was done. That's scarring. And finally, at number 1 is the Asylum. This one actually scared me a bit in my seat, and it's not even like I sit at my desk in a room alone. There's people around me, I was just still scared because I'm small. Shared by Reddit user Daddy's Little Screamer, when she was 16, she and her friend decided to explore the abandoned asylum grounds near her house. Firstly, if I lived in a house near asylum grounds, I would have forced my parents to move. That's not happening from any angle. There was this one tower there that had been locked for what seemed like 5 ever, but that day it wasn't, and at the top of the tower there was a light on, and they both heard a dog barking. Thinking a dog maybe accidentally got itself stuck in the tower, they looked up and were shocked. There's a silhouette in the window for sure, but it was a person's silhouette, not a dog's. The person was the one barking. Without even going into the tower, where the girls ran away and all they heard was this person call out "bye now" in a creepy sing-song voice. You guys know what's coming next, don't you? Oh hell no! Guys, this whole video was a hell no. No, 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 no. Abandoned houses, no.